Hello, Rick here, and well, I thought this would be a bit of fun to compare the timelines of various science fiction series to see how different franchises pictured human progress. Using Star Trek as the first timeline, I looked for a couple of stories that occupied a similar time in our future. The Fallout universe begins rather early on in history, around the 18th century according to some details, but the majority of the differences are localised around the 21st to 23rd centuries. Until the Divergence, as it's known, sometime in the 1950s, Fallout occupies a timeline very similar to our own. I was going to add the Halo universe to this, but their Interstellar history doesn't start until 2362, and the games take place in the 26th century, a bit too far ahead. Battlestar and Star Wars are set way in the past, and one's far, far away, and Destiny is just super vague about all its events. So maybe Mass Effect? It too is based upon our own history, and the games, 1, 2 and 3, take place in the end of the 22nd century. So for this time frame, I'll be ending the Star Trek timeline around the year 2300. Just after the Khitomer conference, giving us a couple of centuries for each universe. So let's start just before the millennium. In 1992, the Ulysses space probe was launched at the Sun. This was a real event and recorded in both Mass Effect and Star Trek, but not Fallout, which had already undergone a divergence in the 1950s. Then in 1993, the future begins. The eugenics wars erupted. Ah yes, I remember them well. They lasted in the Trek universe for 3 years, and at the end of which, sanctions on genetic manipulation were put in place. Then in 2002, the Nomad probe was launched, Earth's first deep space probe. Meanwhile, in the Fallout universe, 2002 marked the establishment of WestTech Research. Hubris Comics were founded in 2021, while in Star Trek, the Bell Riots erupted to protest economic and social divisions in 2024. Shortly after this, World War III erupted in the Star Trek timeline. This lasted from 2026 to 2053, where peace accords were signed in San Francisco amid the ruins of a nuclear-ravaged Earth. While the nations were blowing themselves up in Star Trek, Fallout's government were preparing, converting the Delta IX rockets from spacecraft into warheads in 2034, establishing the Mr. Handy line of robots in 2037, having its citizens abducted by aliens in 2041. Robco was founded in 2042, and 2 years later, John Caleb Bradburton invented Nuka-Cola. Amid Trek's World War III, the Ares 4 mission to Mars was launched in 2032. Back in Fallout, 2052 rolled around, however things took a sharper dip. The EU became engulfed in the resource wars, and the new plague was accidentally released amid a civilian population. I find it interesting that both timelines paint a vision of the future where war is an inevitable outcome. In 2059 Fallout, the Anchorage frontline was established in Alaska to secure resources against Chinese communist forces, as well as the creation of the first true AI. Vault construction begins in earnest in 2062. A year later, back in Trek, April the 5th, 2063. The Phoenix launches and catches the eye of the Vulcan species who initiate first contact with humanity. Mass Effect's been a little quiet. What have they been up to? Well, 2069 saw the establishing of the lunar colony. What, no Great War? No mutually ensured destruction? Well, perhaps that's why the Mass Effect timeline plateaus early. There's no stagnation caused by massive destruction. All of these timelines are utilising ballistic weaponry at this point, however with way more military funding, the Fallout universe has seen a rise in laser, plasma and power armor tech. So back in Fallout, in 2074 the US declares the remaining oil reserves as their own, and in 2075 forced evolutionary virus research begins. Then October 23rd, 2077 rolls around, and the Great War begins and ends. We still don't know who fired first, but within hours the world was decimated, stagnating the technology for the next several hundred years. In 2102, Richard Gray begins his experimentation with the FEV virus, and Vault 76 celebrates its Reclamation Day. In 2103, in both Star Trek and Mass Effect, the first Martian colony is established. Wow, Trek really caught up, but that was kind of the point. It's the only timeline now that's motivated by the certain knowledge of interstellar civilizations. In fact, in 2113, Star Trek's universe, it's officially declared that famine and poverty have been eliminated. 2130 sees the start of the Great Winter in Fallout, and in 2138, Robert House awakens in Vegas. Meanwhile, helium-3 is successfully mined in Mass Effect, the primary fuel for interstellar travel. In Trek, the Warp-2 barrier was broken in 2143, while in Mass Effect, humanity began construction of Gagarin Station, later known as Jump Zero. FTL travel was still beyond them. No Vulcans helping them out here. In 2148, the Prothean archives were unearthed on Mars. Unmarsed, then? This catapulted the advancement of humanity, as it was basically a vault of blueprints and advanced technologies, including the Mass Effect phenomena itself, the secret to FTL travel. Now humanity's advancements are accelerated. In 2149, we see the discovery of the Karen mass relay and the beginnings of the Arcturus station, the first extrasolar outpost. In 2150, Star Trek, the United Earth government is finalised with no remaining independent states, and a year later, the NX project launches its first Warp 5 spaceship, the NX-01 Enterprise. Travel through mass relays is still faster. In 2153, the Xindi attack gives mankind its first taste of interstellar war. In 2154, Mass Effect's Shepard is born. Despite public opinion, his first word was not Rex. 2155 saw the Coalition of Planets, an alliance between Vulcan, Earth, Andor and Teller Prime. And in Fallout, the Gunrunners arms traders were established. In Mass Effect, events were proceeding very quickly now. 2156 saw the completion of Arcturus Station, then in 2157 the Turians made first contact, and the First Contact War was fought and ended by Council intervention. Star Trek's Coalition of Planets had its own conflict with the Romulan Star Empire from 2156 to 2160. Again, humanity's first true space war. In 2159, the first human biotics begin to manifest, individuals with telekinetic-like powers caused by exposure to element zero, the element responsible for the mass effect. And in 2160, humanity turns to the Systems Alliance for leadership, establishing its parliament as it becomes a governmental body. Similarly, in 2161, the United Federation of Planets is founded by the Coalition of Planets and several other member races expressing interest. Fallout 1 takes place in this year also. In 2165, humanity is offered an embassy on the Citadel, Mass Effect's effective universal capital. In 2170, Mindwar is attacked by Batarian slavers. 2 years later, Shepard enters the military. In 2176, the Andromeda Initiative is founded, backed by a mysterious benefactor, Elusive Man. And in 2178, in response to human interests in the Skillian Verge, the Skillian Blitz was conducted by Batarians. In 2183, the human colony of Eden Prime comes under attack by an unknown craft, and the events of Mass Effect 1 take place. Meanwhile, in Star Trek 2184, Jonathan Archer is elected Federation President and serves for 8 years. In 2185, Mass Effect 2 begins with the revival of Commander Shepard. 2186 sees the events of Mass Effect 3 begin with a full-scale Reaper invasion and the culmination of the battle to retake Earth. Aside from Mass Effect Andromeda, this is where the Mass Effect timeline ends. While in the Fallout timeline, the new California Republic begins to form from the settlement of Shady Sands. In 2198, the Enclave begins to consolidate technology and power, and in 2215 Dick Richardson comes to power, the deutagonist of Fallout 2. In 2223, Star Trek sees the beginnings of the Federation Klingon Cold War. Fallout 2227. a soul vault dweller awakens from cryosleep to see his son Sean kidnapped in Vault 111 before being put back under. 2 years later, the broken mask incident occurs where a synthetic human's programming breaks and it starts firing on the Diamond City civilians. In 2237, Rivet City was founded, and in 2241, the events of Fallout 2 begin. 2245 may be a date Star Trek fans are familiar with. The USS Enterprise NCC-1701 is launched under the command of Captain Robert April. Meanwhile, in Fallout 2250, Kaiser, yes, that's how he pronounces it, declares himself Son of Mars, the ancient god of war. 5 years later, 2255, the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel occupies the ruins of the Pentagon and establishes the Citadel, their base of operations. While in space, May 11th, 2256, the Battle of the Binary Stars marks the beginning of a full-scale war between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. In 2258, Fallout 3's Lone Wanderer is born. In 2265, Captain James T. Kirk assumes command of the Enterprise, and we get the events of the original series. In 2267, the Organians force a peace treaty between the Federation and the Klingon people to prevent another war. Later in Fallout 2274, NCR scouts locate Hoover Dam, and in 2277 the first Battle of Hoover Dam between the NCR and Caesar's Legion occurs, as well as the Lone Wanderer leaving the vault and embarking on the events of Fallout 3. 2281 sees an unlucky courier meet Benny in the town of Goodsprings and marks the beginning of New Vegas. Star Trek, the year 2285, the first tests of the Genesis device and the return of Khan Noonien Singh. 2287 sees the Quincy Massacre, where the Minutemen were defeated trying to save the town from the Gunners' mercenary faction. Shortly after, the sole survivor's cryopod is reactivated, and this marks the beginning of Fallout 4. The final point on this shared timeline is, as mentioned, the Khitomer Conference, where a conclusive peace between Klingons and the United Federation of Planets is signed in 2293. The way Mass Effect culminates in the 2180s can be explained by the fact that a lot of their technology is based on the civilizations that had come before. While in both Fallout and Star Trek a massive conflict occurs in the late 21st century, Trek undergoes First Contact, which gives humanity a purpose to strive for. Fallout doesn't have a monumental event like this. Instead, the populace hunkers down, leading to generations who have known no difference. So, next time you watch the Kirk-era Star Trek films, bear in mind that someone else's vision of the future was very different, beginning with a survivor crawling out of a vault to search for his son. Or the next time you watch Enterprise, consider that in another timeline, humanity was striving for the stars in Mass Effect. Or not, because these are completely separate franchises that have almost nothing to do with each other. I don't care. This was fun, and I hope you found it entertaining too. Thanks for watching. I've been Rick, and I'll see you next video. Until then, live long and prosper. I should go, and ta-ta now.